All right, welcome to our for loop video. But in this video, I want to go through things a little bit differently, and not just code, but go through a kind of a bit of a slide deck and some notes on how to use the for loop in Python because it's not strictly a counter controlled loop, it's more of a sequence controlled loop. We can demonstrate the same features, but we have to do it using not the typical relational operator. So, first, we got to figure out how to create sequences and what they are. Okay, so let's get into this. A sequence is, as we described before, a collection of things. A sequence can be a collection of strings, it could be a list, it could be a tuple, which all things we will study later as we start working our way through. But either way, it's a collection of things. The strings, there's things that we've already talked about, though. The for loop utilizes what we call an in operator. As long as the element we're working with is in the sequence, we can continue working across the sequence. The in operator is actually a Boolean operator. It determines if an element is a member of a sequence. So if I have a sequence called Python programming, which is a string, I could print if P is in my sequence or if B is in my sequence. If I say P is in my sequence, then that evaluates the true. B is in my sequence, or evaluates the false. There are P's in the sequence. There are no capital B's in the sequence. Now we can start utilizing this in conditional statements as well. If Python is in my sequence, we must be teaching Python. Well, we are, because Python, that element, that substring, is part of this string. So we do it. And I put an exclamation mark in my sequence. It says, I guess it's not important because the exclamation mark is nowhere in the sequence. The in operator is a very convenient operator to see if an element is a member of a sequence. It'll return true if the element on the left is a member of the sequence on the right, false otherwise. Now, sometimes our sequences, we don't necessarily need them to be strings. We need them to be a defined set of numbers. Okay, and that's where most of our for loops will kind of be. In order to do that, we can use a range function in Python to help create a sequence of integers. The range function accepts 3 arguments, but only one is mandatory. There is a start, stop, and a step. The start is an optional argument that tells you where the sequence would start. The stop is a mandatory argument that determines where the sequence should stop. Now, when you do enter in a stop value, that value is not actually a member of the sequence, however. You stop just short of it. The step is a second optional argument that will tell you how to change the sequence from one element to the next. You'll see some examples in that in the next couple slides, but you do have to provide it with one argument at least, the stop. If you don't provide it with a start, it will automatically start at 0. If you provide it with a start and a stop, make sure that you have the start being less than the stop. Unless, of course, you implement a negative step, then you can have it run backwards. So let's look at a few examples. If I put in and call the function range on 5, what it will do is produce a sequence from 0 through 4. It starts at 0, goes up to, and does not include 5. But it gives me 5 elements, and that's really what this function is kind of getting at, that it gives me 5 elements starting at 0. So give yourself a quick guess. What would range of 10 produce? Hopefully, you're thinking 0 through 9, which is good. Gives me 10 elements starting at 0, working my way up through 9. If I go range 1 to 5, 1 comma 5, it's going to start at 1, end at 4, just short of 5. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4. I always like to think about this as start here, and then I subtract these two values to see how many I would get. 5 minus 1 is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 values. I bet you can try to figure out what 10 to 20 would produce. Hopefully you realize it's 10 to 19, to be perfectly honest with you. If I provide it with 3 values, a start, stop, and a step, this will start at 0, work my way up to, but not include 10, but it will only produce every other number. So it steps from 0, 2 units to 2, steps from 2, 2 units to 4, to 4 to 6, 6 to 8, does not include 10 because 10 is the stop value. And therefore, I bet you can idea what this will produce. 10 down to 0 by negative 1, but again, not include the 0, so I get everything from 10 down to 1. Okay, so our range function will give us a sequence, but it will give us a sequence of integers that we, start and stop in any way that we want, or even increment by any value that we want. Okay, if you want to work it backwards, which is essentially what you're doing, you'll be thinking about, well, how many iterations do I want, or what does I want my sequence to be? So you're going to have to design a range function for that. If I want my sequence to be the numbers 0 through 3, well, then I would produce a range function that is just range of 4. You could also do range 0 comma 4, but range of 4 will suffice. If you gotta go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, okay, I'm starting at 1 up to 9, need to include the 9 by 2s. So think about what you might say, and hopefully you come up with something like this: 1 comma 10 comma 2. The reason we have the 10 is because I need to go past the 9 a little bit. I need to make sure the 9's included. So I got to go beyond it quite just a little bit. I could also go to 11, would work the exact same way. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hopefully you're producing the range function starting at 5, working down to, technically this should be -1. That is a typo here. And this should be -1. So replace that 0 with a -1 and it should work out just fine. Here, range of 101, 0 through 100, and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 should be 5 to 11. Again, the step is not necessary unless you're stepping by something other than 1. Okay. So there's your range function and what it can produce. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Again, if not, let me know and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Now, how do you put it all together with a for loop? Well, a for loop is a sequence controlled loop. We set it up as such. For some item in the sequence, we do something. So if I wanted to loop through all the characters in a string, I could say for character in Python, and it would print the character. And what it does, it prints all the characters in a print statement. P is the first character, then Y, then T, then H, then O, then N. This does give me that kind of counter-controlled field, a fixed repetition field, because it's only going to loop 6 times because there's only 6 characters in Python. But this element here catches one member from the sequence at a time, and then you can use it in the loop if you desire. You don't have to, but it's there to use. If I did something like this, word equals PSHS, value in word, it should print P, S, H, and S. If I go for value in range of 5, print the value. It should print 0 through 4 because range of 5 gives me a sequence 0 through 4. If I say print or for element in range 10, 0, -2, hopefully you're seeing that it prints out and goes 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. Does not include 0 because my stop is at 0 as I work my way through. So that's how we can kind of start to build our for loops to work the way that we want them to work. So let's build a couple out. Maybe we'll do a couple of counting ones and then some phrase ones just to see where we're at. Let's come in here. We'll do a quick for loop demonstration. Okay, let's just print the values from 1 to 20. So in that case, there's no control variable that I really need to make up. I can really do just write a simple for loop for value. Call this whatever you want. You can call it number, you can call it counter, you can call it item, you can call it element. I like value. I always like my control variable here, the item I'm going to catch, to be meaningful towards the sequence, what is going to be held in the sequence. The sequence is going to have a bunch of values in it. So I'd say for value in range of, and I want to go 1 to 20. So I want to go 1 comma 21 so that I can get everything out. And I'll print the value along with some n equals, and we'll go with that so that it shows each one individually. Let's run it, save it, and we should see there's my numbers 1 to 20. If I want to go and print something backwards, okay, let's print, I don't know, 10 to 0 by ones. Well, pretty easy. For, I could say counter if I want, in range of, and I'll go 10 comma, I want to go down to and include 0, so I'm going to go a little beyond it, -1 by -1. Counter, and let's run it, see what happens. Oh, okay. And we could even take something similar to what we did in the past where we were counting words in a phrase. Okay. Well, I can get the phrase from the user. Okay. And again, that's just straight input because it's coming in a string. And the string that I have here, phrase, is a sequence of characters. So I could say for each character in the phrase, I could check to see if that character happens to be equal to a space, right? And I can keep track and count the number of spaces. So we'll create that variable, make it equal to 0, and we'll increment it. Now remember, when I display this, I want to display that the number of words is always equal to spaces plus 1. So we'll say num words equals spaces plus 1. And we'll print, we'll do an f string. We'll say the as, and we'll say num words. There you go. So let's give it a shot. We'll run it, see what happens. Okay, so there's my numbers. Enter a short phrase. We'll say the quick brown fox. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 words, and spaces is not defined. That happens a lot. That simply means that I misspelled something. I called it spaces here, but space here. So I'm going to go with spaces so that every variable name matches. Let's run it one more time. Let's go the quick brown fox, and it has 4 words in it. So that's how I can use a sequence controlled loop to kind of work as a counter controlled loop in the same sense. You must create the sequence first and foremost. The range function is going to be your most popular function for doing so. Oftentimes we'll just pass in one value, but we could pass in 2 or more. That value could be used in the loop, or maybe not. Maybe we just need to keep track of how many times we're doing something, but that is the proper technique in Python to create that counter controlled loop if we want, but it is technically a sequence controlled loop. So hopefully that helps out in designing some of your programs as we start working our way through. We'll go through a larger example of how we can do and put everything together in a moment. So feel free to chime into that video. And if you have any questions, let me know and I'd be happy to help.